I'm Kevin Haggerty, Vice Chair of the Marin Coalition. Today I'm filling in for our Chair, Scott Pinsky, who's away. I would like to acknowledge our board members who are here today. Robin Keller, Alan Shavitz, and Pat Randolph in the back. All these board members have done a terrific amount of work in putting together these programs. The Marin Coalition is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Our goal is to provide a place for conversations that matter. Over the years, we have presented hundreds of speakers on programs of interest to Marin residents. We're thankful for you, our community and audience, for your support, encouragement, and feedback, donations, and mostly for your attendance at these events during the past decades. We look forward to another 50 years. This is our second program of this season at this location. After last season, the Board of Directors, responding to comments from many in the audience, spent considerable time reviewing location, timing, and cost of our programs. We received many comments that the cost and value of attending our programs, as well as the timing of the programs, created a barrier for some regular and potential audiences from attending at the old location. We believe that our new location, event timing and pricing, will be a workable alternative. That said, we are still fine-tuning the logistics of our events, and we welcome your feedback. We would appreciate if you would complete the questionnaire on your table, and also feel free to share your comments with any of our board members. On another note, last year the Marin Coalition decided to simplify its operation by eliminating membership structure, so we are no longer asking folks to send annual dues, and have shifted to a voluntary donation model. As a nonprofit organization, we have an all-volunteer board, but we still have certain expenses that we still have to rely upon the donations of the audience to keep the organization afloat and in good standing. We therefore ask that you consider making a donation in any amount you're comfortable with to help support our operation. You can find more information on donations by going to our website, marincoalition.org. Before we get started, let me tell you about two upcoming programs. On November 20th, we will get an update from Rod Kerr, who was foreperson of the 2023-24 Marin County Civil Grand Jury that completed their work this past June. Rod will provide us with a summary of the issues of the recent Civil Grand Jury investigated and their recommendations. He will also talk about the vital role that the Civic Grand Jury plays in Marin County and how the residents of Marin can apply to serve on future grand juries. And then in December, on December 5th, we'll hear from Derek Johnson, the newly installed Marin County Executive, who recently succeeded long-standing top administrator Matthew Heimel. Now that the torch has been passed, this will be an opportunity to hear what the county's top priorities are under his leadership. We'll be keeping the same timing and location for these future events. I hope that you'll be able to join us for one or both of the events. And now on for tonight's event. Our guest speaker is Mimi Willard. Mimi Willard is founder and president of the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, otherwise known as COST. A chartered financial analyst, Mimi contributes financial and budgetary expertise accumulated over 20 years as a nationally ranked financial analyst at major investment banks, including Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers. Mimi graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Reed College with a degree in biology. She pursued graduate studies in cellular physiology as a Churchill Scholar at the University of Cambridge in England, and as a graduate fellow at the Rockefeller University in Woods Hole Biological Laboratory. She later received a Master of Philosophy degree in American History from Yale, focusing on political press in the early American Republic and the history of epidemics. please welcome Mimi Willard.
Thank you, Kevin, for that gracious introduction, and thank you to everybody at the Marin Coalition for inviting me and you to this event. I want to start with just a little bit about the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. We have been in operation now for a little over 7 years, and we have grown and evolved. We are an all-volunteer organization. We have a phenomenal board, and it's an operating board, so there are people who do heavy lifting and provide guidance and input for collective decisions that we make about what we do. I see one of our board members here, Kingston Cole. Would you stand up and just wave at everybody? Thanks, Kingston. And their bios are on our website at sensibletaxpayers.org. We have a new website for you to check out. And I think you'll find it pretty impressive, the people who are behind this operation. Another thing that's on our website, which will be germane to our discussion today, is what we call our sensible tax criteria. And this is one of the things I think that distinguishes us from other taxpayer groups in the state of California. We hope maybe it will someday be a model for others, but so far we're unique. And what we have done is fairly early in our evolution, back in 2017, we wrote down a set of criteria under which we would evaluate taxes. And we today use those to judge a tax, and we not only oppose taxes that we think violate those principles, but we also endorse taxes that meet our criteria. And this is pretty much not done at taxpayer organizations, which generally are anti-tax groups. And I would put a little aside there. We did about a year and a half ago a little survey of people who responded among our supporter or reader group as to what were their political leanings, and it came out about kind of where we might have hoped or thought, which is about half of the people describe themselves as centrist and a quarter left and a quarter right, and we're trying to walk that middle of the road with sensible solutions. So what's a sensible solution? We have on our website our sensible tax criteria, and they start at the very top with necessity. If we're not convinced that a tax is necessary, then we're not for it. Whether we actively engage in trying to defeat it or not, it must meet that criterion. Then we have other criteria in addition to that. Fairness is very high up, obviously, and linked to that is affordability. You know, is it as fair as possible? If it's a necessary tax, let's spread it around as fairly and affordably as can be done. We value a lot transparency. We want them to be telling you the truth and the key things that you need to know before you vote yes or no. And particularly now we're concentrating on those 75 words that are on your ballot above that little oval bubble. And there are a fair number of measures that are out there that really they're developed by the pollsters to get you to vote yes, and don't necessarily tell you the key things that you need to know. This year we also did something new, which was we had a collaboration which interestingly bubbled up out of the community, where we had outreach from the civic leaders in Mill Valley who had quite an unfortunate debacle and run-in with their school board over the possible building of a new school on a piece of property that was currently occupied by a field that is were very popularly used by everybody in Mill Valley for all of their sporting events and a number of community events, and they wanted to move the school there, and the original bond measure did not make clear that that was a goal of the bond measure, nor was it clear that that was permitted under the bond measure. So that was somehow worked out among the leaders in Mill Valley together with the school district. But out of that came a real distrust of bonds from some of the people that you would normally think are the ones who, because of their position on councils and so on, would be wanting to support things like schools being built. And so they reached out to us and said, we think that there ought to be some guidelines promulgated for what's a good bond and what should it have to disclose, and what kind of oversight constitutes real oversight as opposed to tissue oversight. And typically all these bonds, they say, oh, we'll have a citizen oversight committee. Well, the entity that's issuing the bonds gets to choose who's on the Citizen Oversight Committee, and the Citizen Oversight Committee is restricted to reviewing it after the money's been spent. Anyhow, those are also posted on our website, the bond guidelines and guardrails, and they are under the About tab. So we're now have had some interesting things happen as we have evolved. And I'll start by saying that the idea of possibly endorsing tax was not my idea. I was probably not the first one to second or third it, but I was listening to the other people on our board as they were talking about the merits of that, went along with it, and I have to say it was, I think, the most important decision that we have made in our years of existence, because what it has opened us up to do is that there's kind of a carrot and a stick process now that can happen where an agency or a jurisdiction is considering bringing forth some kind of tax to the public to vote upon, and more and more often they are reaching out to us. Well, first they start by reading the sensible tax criteria, which is, that's a win right there. And then often they'll make some little tweak to try to see if they can, kind of fit into those. Some of them will reach out to us in the process and ask us to engage with them, to give them feedback about what they're thinking, what kind of changes they could make. And in some instances that results in some good compromises that we're happy with and that we're willing to support. So that's kind of the backdrop here. So today's discussion is going to be about what's on your ballot. I'm going to start with the very top of the ballot, which is state propositions. And the one that we think really matters and that will potentially be a game changer for all of us is Proposition 5. Proposition 5, we believe, has the likelihood of unleashing a tax tsunami that will potentially have generational impact, because right now, Proposition 5, which I'll describe to you in a moment, will result in a lot more bond measures passing a lot more easily. And as we've just talked about, the bond measures are a whole fraught area. These are going to be local bond measures. And the impact of that is that because a bond is typically 30 years, some instances more, voting on a bond today has impact to the next generation. And if we approve a whole lot of them now, because it was much easier to do so, by the time we realize that maybe that exceeded the general population's affordability, it's too late. You've issued the bonds, you have a legal obligation to fulfill the obligations under the bond, and you're stuck for the 30 years. So what does Proposition 5 do? It lowers the threshold to pass a bond measure at the local level from 2/3 to 55%. Theoretically, that just applies to infrastructure and affordable housing, but it's generally perceived that smart localities will figure out how to fit almost anything into that description. So there will be a lot more bonds being offered if this passes, and as a not so irrelevant aside, that will also reduce those newcomers down to the special level that we've reserved for schools. So arguably, you might not think it's so bad to make it easier to pass bonds, but you might think that schools are your priority, in which case this might not be something that appeals to you. So the argument in favor of Proposition 5 is that by allowing a third of the population who votes no, a third plus one person, to kill a bond measure, basically is minority rule. And so a number of respectable entities out there have seized on that argument. And then the subsidiary argument, which I find a little less credible, but that local government will rely less on the state. In other words, we won't have to always be going to the state for more money for schools or whatever. It's had the support of the Democratic Party. I think all of the things we're going to talk about today has had the support of the Democratic Party. Well, let me do them one by one. Constructions, Trade, and the Marine Board of Supervisors. I'm going to take a little segue here into the Marine Board of Supervisors. So the Marine Board of Supervisors last week held a meeting at which they weighed in on virtually all, I think but one, of the measures on the state ballot. And I'm not really sure why that's their mission. I'll just leave that as an open question. Maybe somebody has an answer that justifies that. I personally, I think it's problematic. But one of the reasons that Marine Board of Supervisors is motivated by Prop 5 is something called Regional Measure 4, which we'll come back to talk about. But Regional Measure 4 is a big boatload of money for affordable housing. We call it the unaffordable housing bond. And it will not pass, or it won't pass easily, or won't pass with its grandiose size unless it gets some help from Proposition 5 being enacted. So our view is that people should be dim on Proposition 5. We think, as I said before, it worsens our affordability crisis, and it really opens the door to what comes next, which is, I fully expect if Prop 5 goes through, that the legislature will bring to us again in the not too distant future a similar measure that drops any of the remaining measures that require 2/3 approval down to 55% or probably 50% plus one. And that was actually in the original version of what became Prop 5 until they realized that was going to kill it. And the reason it was going to kill it, I think, is because one of the insidious things about Proposition 5 is it pits renters against homeowners. And renters are now 45% of the state electorate, and many of them don't see the linkage between voting yes on a local bond and what happens to their rent. Now, we could argue that they're really not thinking it through very well, or we could say, well, in fact, they're looking at what's going on around them, which is, at least in the Bay Area, at least in the more liberal parts of the Bay Area were seeing more efforts to impose very, very strict restrictions on what landlords can charge and other aspects of their relationship with their tenants. One other thing on a couple other things on Prop 5. One is that there's some misleading ballot language that was challenged by a couple of entities. One of them was Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. I don't remember who teamed up with them on that. It may have been Caltax, the business lobby. And they asserted that the 75 words were misleading because they didn't inform the voter that the language basically said, with this proposition, the hurdle to pass a tax here to henceforth will be 55%. And the naive voter, probably most of them thought, or many of them would have thought, well, it's probably all just 50% now. So they're limited to 75 words, and the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against this language said, hey, you still have enough words, you're allowed 75 words, and you didn't use them all. So you can just add, decreases from 2/3, and it will be appropriate disclosure. So it went to the whatever it didn't. I don't think it went to the California Supreme Court, but it went to a court where the judges, judges or justices, whatever they are at that level, had been, for the most part, democratically appointed, and the entirety of Proposition 5 is being pushed forward by the Democratic supermajority in the legislature, and it was rejected, and there was no time left to go to the Supreme Court, and no point, because the Supreme Court would have been more of the same. So here we have it. I do think it's notable that the Bay Area News Group, which owns our IJ, came out on our side of the equation here of opposing Proposition 5, and I thought their take on it was kind of interesting. They called out the deceitfulness, they used that word, of many bond measures, and basically said, we, the voters, shouldn't lower the threshold until the deceit is fixed.
Deceit being sponsored by the agency that's promoting the bond, sending out information, which is really thinly veiled advertisements for the bond. That kind of deceit? Is that what you're referring to?
They're saying, for example, it's often not clear, as we've argued. Well, first of all, they say, when you vote for a bond, they don't tell you how much you already pay. You've already got 2 bonds. I'll talk about the Kentfield School District bond, where it's going to be the 3rd existing one, and they got a 4th one in the pipeline. But nobody knows, because we collapse that all into one line on your tax statement, unless you get your technology self going and you go online and you click on the county finance website and figure out, oh my God, that one line just expanded into like this list. So how much do you already pay for that existing jurisdiction? How many other bonds or whatever? How much will you pay? Which was the fight that we got in over Measure A for Tamla Pius Union High School District, where we insisted on saying it was $1 billion tax, which it was, and they kept insisting on saying it was $517 million bond. And they also called out toothless oversight because of the things that I already described. So they're saying, fix this stuff, and then let's talk about lowering the thresholds. Good question, Greg. So enough of that. Proposition 2 is the next thing on the ballot. And what Proposition 2 does, it issues bonds for 35 years. That the total amount issued is $10 billion. That's $18 billion with interest, one of those things they don't tell you, to build and repair schools, which sounds to us all as probably a good thing. Now, the backdrop is, though, that the legislature this year cut school funding from the budget, which didn't cut it entirely, but cut it rather significantly in their budget compromises, which makes it harder for schools to maintain their facilities. So the argument in favor, obviously, is the money is needed for structural repairs. We've got a lot of old schools in California. This is true. The pro has the support of teachers, labor, building trades, the California Chamber of Commerce, which I thought was interesting, and the Marine Board of Supervisors. So on the no side of the equation, I already mentioned the Bay Area News Group, the parents of the IJ, they're also against this one. And their argument is a valid one, which is that it favors wealthy districts because Proposition 2 has a structure in it under which, in order for School District A to get $300 million from the state, they have to match it by some proportion. And only school districts that have the wealth within their communities to issue bonds or happen to have that kind of money kicking around can tap it. So when that criticism came forward, there were some other scoring adjustments that were made for lower income areas, etc. But the gurus who have looked at it said it's still significantly tilted towards wealthy districts. It adds $500 million a year to the general fund. And when you read the language, it's really not clear to you. I mean, when I first moved to California, I'm going to admit how ignorant I was. I didn't think there was any cost to voting yes for a state bond. I didn't know. It turns out that basically that $500 million a year of interest is really unfunded because we have a state that's already in deficit, and so unless they suddenly turn into a significant surplus, including the extra $500 million, one or two things is going to happen. They're either going to defund something else, or they are going to have to come back to us with the tax in the next election cycle, or so, some kind of tax increase. I think that's enough about Proposition 2. So I think the bottom line there is that if Proposition 2 passes, there will be increases in taxes at both the state level and the local level, because at the local level you have to do it in order to be able to meet the match. Proposition 4 is kind of similar in that it's another $10 billion of borrowing. This one's stretched out over a 40-year payback. The interesting thing that happened there was that in the latest, I think it was in the latest budget, single-year budget, the legislature, in order to try to make the deficit less and tap the rainy day fund somewhat less, cut $9.4 billion out of what had been a signature piece of legislation just a small handful of years prior, which is California's climate crisis program. So they take away with one hand $9.4 billion, and then they come back to you on the ballot with, well, give us $10 billion that we'll borrow for the future, and now we'll restore some money for climate. That's the story there. The argument in favor of Proposition 4 is that we are facing climate change. We need money to improve water quality and water supply in California, which is about half of the money. And then there's a hodgepodge of drought and floods and rivers and heat and wildfire, etc. in that. It's kind of a potpourri. Again, supported by the Democratic Party, labor, firefighters, environmentalists, water districts, and the Marin Board of Supervisors. On the no side of the equation, the argument is the one that I just previewed for you, that it's adding to the credit card debt a whole pile of things that are not a coherent policy or strategy, but that essentially are making this group happy and that group happy and kind of, you know, redistributing the goodies. It adds $400 million a year to the general fund, demands on the general fund, those are kind of the key things there. The final one on the state ballot that is of concern to us is Proposition 33. And Proposition 33 has to do with rents. And what Proposition 33 does is, if passed, it would allow local governments to impose rent controls that are more stringent than those at the state level, and more importantly, include some more relatively recently built housing stock, rental housing stock, that has been protected since early 1995 by something called Costa-Hawkins that was passed then. And Costa-Hawkins basically says anything pre-1995 is allowed to, the landlords are allowed to raise the rent 5% a year plus inflation with a cap at 10%. And everything post-90, that early 1995 timeframe is essentially free market. And Proposition 33 would knock that down and basically allow local jurisdictions, if they choose to do something that is much more aggressive in terms of trying to control the rents that are paid at the local level. And the argument there is, in favor, is that 30% of renters pay over half of their income on rent. And that's a truly sad statement about where we are right now in California. And there's a lot of pain there. Some people at a certain point, particularly older people, and more of them are getting pushed out of their housing because they can't afford the increases on what might be a sort of fixed income. And they argue that rent control doesn't go far enough. That argument is supported by a number of tenants' rights groups, the California Association of Retired Americans, and the State Democratic Party. So our organization has been talking about rent control for a while. Kingston's smiling because it went on for quite a long time. And the question was, is this actually in our bailiwick? Or, are we going to have mission creep here if we wander into this food fight? And after a great deal of debate and a lengthy period of time, we decided, yeah, actually, it really is. And the reasons are that holding down the value, holding down the rents has a negative impact on the value of those rental properties. That decreases the tax base, and either we will all suffer a decline in our services, or we will be called upon to make up the difference. That's the first argument. The second argument, which I had the privilege of joining the group that appeared before the Marin IJ editorial board, which was looking at Measure K for Larkspur. And Measure K for Larkspur was proposing, Larkspur had a lengthy process in which they put together a rent control measure that tried to be Solomon-esque. And so they set a rental cap of 7% per annum after hearing, a whole lot of really sorry stories from people who were living in the Skylarks apartment, which is a huge complex, and was bought by a major corporate investor. And people there were alarmed about what was going to happen to their rents. And yet at the same time, hearing pushback from the other side of small landlords and so on, who basically felt it was confiscatory, that too aggressive a rent control was going to be confiscatory and impair their retirements and the value of their properties. So they came in with a kind of a middle-of-the-road proposal, and that was enacted by the council, but the tenants' rights groups were not happy with that, and so they came back with something that was very akin to what's happened in Fairfax, which is a much more aggressive cap of 60% of CPI or 3%, whichever is less. Which, clearly, if you're a landlord, you cannot operate under that. Though there is a provision to appeal if you're the landlord. But typically you have to pay a pretty stiff fee, like $1,000, I think per unit, to appeal this. And Stephen, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong. You're a Fairfax expert here. And at least in Larkspur, this was then going to be reviewed. Each of one of these appeals was going to have to be reviewed by staff and go before council. And I believe that the city council also was going to have to get involved. And they estimated, I think that it was going to cost them something like $600,000 a year to administer this. So that's the other part of the equation here. So we have wandered into it, and we think that Costa-Hawkins just kind of further fuels this phenomenon. Okay, I think that's it for statewide measures, except to mention that there's something called Proposition 34, on which I am not an expert, but what Proposition 34 does is it basically says that if you are doing certain kinds of health insurance, the money that comes out of that health insurance has to stay in health insurance. And the reason for that proposition is it's an attack on a group which has been taking money out of the spread in the pharmaceutical pricing within your health insurance network and using that money to try to implement rent controls, to lobby for rent controls. So read about it, Google it. It's a very bizarre thing. Okay, onto the local level here. So we have somewhere here in my handout. Here's my cheat sheet. Okay, I'm going to start with some good news. We have endorsed a couple of taxes. And yes, you have a question.
Well, pardon me, before you move on, could I ask a question? And this may be something that you guys may already know, but I don't. I was wondering what Proposition 2, how does that relate to Measure B, for instance? Because I see the similar need there,
Yes.
and I don't know that.
Yes.
I just wondered if you
So
could explain.
measure, we'll come, give me a minute, let's get to
Yeah,
Measure B.
sure.
But I'll make sure to answer that, because I have to explain what Measure B is first and then
Sure.
get to it. Okay, it's soon, coming soon.
Okay, thank you.
Coming attractions. Okay, Sausalito Marin City School District parcel tax. We are proud to have endorsed it, and hope and hope and hope that it will pass. And Sausalito Marin City has been struggling as a school district. One of their challenges is being able to have enough money to fund the teachers that they want, and at rates that are competitive enough to hold on to them. And they've actually had to do some cutbacks there. We think it's needed, and we were really thrilled that they were willing to go with our guidance on this of doing it on a per square foot basis. So if you are the person, this is a real person, I know, who lives in a studio condo somewhere in the Tamalpais Union High School district, that person pays the same amount of parcel tax as a mall, a 100-unit apartment building, a mansion. It's grossly unfair, it's terrifically regressive, and virtually all our school districts have insisted upon doing it this way. Some of them for historical reasons, because there was a little question around the law, but some of them just because it's the way we always did it. And so we have been working on this for quite a while. We really hate what we call these flat parcel taxes, and we basically will oppose them all the time, and unless somehow you convince us it's like beyond necessary. And actually the first success we had with this was the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority tax going back to 2020, which was done on a per square foot basis, and they had read our sensible tax criteria. They came to us, we're summoned up to Matthew Heimel's office, and he wants to get our, get us behind them because we made you happy, right? And we said, yeah, but, which is a whole other thing. That the yeah, but had to do with the fact that that particular tax was proposed to be until ended by voters. And we said, wait a second, that's a forever tax. We cannot support a forever tax, and we think this is a really important thing that you're trying to do here, which is to improve the safety of our community. And he said, no, the polling shows it polls better. And we said, well, that's because they don't understand what that means. People think that it means it's not a 10-year tax. They could stop it tomorrow. All they'd have to do is get a bunch of people together and oppose it, and put it on the ballot. And of course, people don't realize what's involved, and it essentially never happens. It's too expensive. You have to get a gazillion signatures. You have to either do it yourself or hire at $10 a signature. Actually, I think it's like $17 a signature now, or something like that. Kingston knows that answer.
That was at the Santa Fe School Board.
Was that 17? Yeah, $17 a pop. And then you have legal fees, and then you gotta run a campaign, and it's expensive. So, I'm sorry, long segue. But so the bottom line of what happened at the end of the story on the Marin Wildfire Authority was that it had a happily ever after, because although the county resisted, the cities that had fire departments and the independent fire agencies had a vested interest that aligned with ours. They didn't want to give away forever to a brand new, untested agency with a supposed plan. In effect, what's a piece of their ability to tax their local electorate, turn it over to the county forever. So they came behind our proposal and joined us in insisting on a 10-year sunset, which they had been asked by the county. They had to pass a resolution in every one of these jurisdictions with the same language as the county. They said, we're not signing that language, we're inserting our own language that says 10-year sunset. And then it went back to the county, game over. So here we are, 4 years later, and Sausalito Marin City wants to do a school parcel tax. And so we talked with them and we said, if you do it on a per square foot basis, and you clearly need it, and you have a sunset of 10 years or less, they chose 8, we'll endorse you. So we just hope they pass it, because 2/3 is a pretty high hurdle. So that's the story. We also endorsed a Mill Valley school tax, sales tax, I'm sorry, it's a 1% increase. And we didn't love everything about this particular one, but at the end of the day, we did feel that between their roads and some of the poor quality roads and some issues about evacuation and bridges and so on, that they needed some money for infrastructure, and they worked really hard with us for the good part of a year, trying to figure out like what would be the least offensive tax. And at the end of the day, it came down to it's not our favorite tax, but it's the one that was going to work for their electorate. They did a lot of polling, they did a lot of work with the community, they had an extensive list of what they're going to do with it. So we're endorsing that. Yes?
You mentioned regressive taxes earlier,
Yes.
and obviously sales tax are one of the most regressive taxes there are.
Yes.
Why, and that's a huge amount of money over an
Yes.
extended period of time.
Yes.
Why was that not an impediment?
It is an impediment, and maybe Kingston would like to say something about this as well, but we sit down with our criteria, and we try to give some serious consideration to all of the merits on both sides. And I think actually the fact that it was a sales tax wasn't even as much a sticking point to us, with us, though that is one of our criteria, that we don't love them. I think the biggest one for us was that we weren't really thrilled that the money goes into the general fund. So we spent a lot of time getting comfortable with the fact that, you know, they're in really strong financial position. They've taken down their unfunded pension liability. They've largely neutralized it. And they have, I think, the strongest city manager and the strongest council in the county. So it was like, okay, could we trust them for 10 years? We think so. So, but yeah, it's like perfect is the enemy of good, and so you know, that's how sometimes we have to wrestle with these decisions. And I think Kingston would say we probably spend too much time on some of these.
The difference, there are some other measures you're going to talk about, oh, excuse me, in a couple of minutes, but, and I'm thinking of Ballot in particular, but
Yeah.
the one thing is that when we sat down and talked with them, is they have a culture, all right, in Mill Valley. They have a culture of people coming into office, leaving after 2 terms. It's a good government, okay? People trust their government. It's one of the biggest problems we have today, is no one's trusting government very much, you know, at all sorts of levels.
Oh, that's such a great segue.
I'll shut up now.
Oh, no, but if you hadn't finished your thought, finish it.
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's so important, and that's one of the reasons, even though it was a big gulp, taking down 1%. See, we know what we believe, you know, based on the past experience with Mill Valley, that they're gonna do what they said, okay?
Yeah.
And that's, we can't say that about so many of our taxes and so many of the other issues that are confronting us today.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'm finished.
No, that's great. I appreciate the introduction to Fairfax. So, Fairfax, they wanted to do something about the roads, which I understand are truly in miserable condition. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yes,
Okay.
worse than the county.
Okay, worst in the county. So, you can give them some points there for necessity. So they polled for doing a bond to fix their roads and other infrastructure. They polled at what I believe to be the legal maximum of a bond at any given time of $60 per 100,000 or $600 per $1 million of assessed value, which is a pretty big hike for one tax right there on your tax bill. It did not poll very well. It was basically declared by the consultant, I forgot the words they used, but essentially, not viable, which is to say dead on arrival. But in that same poll, they also asked, they usually ask the warm-up questions to the respondents to these polls, and they asked, you know, well, what's your opinion of your city council? And it was underwater. Now, true, it was underwater like like 48% approval, and there were 42% who disapproved, and there was a bunch of not, don't know or don't care. But still, that's not an impressive level of confidence in an entity to which you are now going to give authority for making decisions on something that you'll be paying for 30 years, but most of that money gets spent in the first 5 to 10 years max. So that's an important contrast, as Kingston was saying, relative to, say, Mill Valley. Meanwhile, in Fairfax, we have some, the usual quagmire of poor disclosure and poor oversight and loose language, etc., 30-year slush fund. But they had their own unique twist, which I'd never seen before, which they said that this bond measure would raise, quote, raise, unquote, $1.2 million per year. Wow, $1.2 million a year for, a place that spends, in 1 year, $1 million, anywhere from $500,000 to a couple $1 million a year on roads. 1.2 million is a lot of extra money. But no, that includes the interest. So, from our point of view, that's a disqualifying act right there. But meanwhile, also, Fairfax will be facing Tam Union High School District on the same ballot at another $180 per million, and a Ross Valley School District parcel tax that is almost certainly looming here. They did some polling for it this year and it didn't look good, and they're going to be coming back. So we're not too keen on that. We also believe that from looking at their financials, that the current council has wandered into mission creep, and that the mission creep has resulted in some expenses that were unnecessary that could have helped, at least to some degree, with their roads problem. So, on to Novato, forever tax. So there they want to increase their sales tax 0.75 percentage point to the legal maximum. And here you have a situation where this is a city that has been the unfortunate target of a rather exhaustive Marine Civil Grand Jury report that unveiled a number of deficiencies. And among those are, I'll wait for this to stop. Great, thank you. Fiscal mismanagement. In terms of, they did things like they loaned city money to unaffiliated entities. They have a pile of properties that they're responsible for the maintenance of and that are not being used and not generating any income. Meanwhile, from 2017 to the present, they have never actually been caught all the way up to current on their audits. At one point, they were 3 years behind on the audits. And so they come to the voters and say, well, we really need this money because if you don't give us some more money, we can't keep drawing down our reserves any further, and we are going to need, therefore, to lay off some people, and so this is the gun to the head, and so you need to trust us that forever. And there is a citizen group up in Novato that is working pretty hard on trying to defeat this, and we have taken a position against it and wrote the ballot arguments against. So that's Novato. Then there's the Kentfield School District bond, which is a $48 million bond that becomes $96 million with interest. This is for a school district of 1,100 kids. It will be Kentfield's third school bond outstanding. They have a 2004, 2014, now they'll have a 2024. If it passes, that doesn't even include TAM Union. If it passes, that will result in all bonds totaling $558 per $1 million of assessed value. Plus, Kentfield has what I believe is the distinction of, if it is not the highest, it is in the top 2 or 3 in the state, but the last I knew it was the highest parcel tax in the state at $1,800. So they would be for sure the highest parcel tax in the county, the highest outstanding bonds, assessed value of bonds per tax year. Let me try it again. At $558 per $1 million of assessed value for the bonds, if this passes, that would be higher than any other school district in the county, K-8 school district. So plus the highest parcel tax, and you know the crazy thing about it is this is just for maintenance. Now it is true that the facilities look like they're in pretty bad condition to some extent. At least they've got failing roofs, which results in mold and bleed through to the ceiling tiles below, and other issues. So the entire bond is just for maintenance after spending the prior bond on expanding their facilities, which now have a lower number of students in them than at the time that they're expanding, but at that time they didn't know that. At the end of the consultant report for this latest proposed school bond, the last slide says, it has a warning in effect, though it doesn't have, it's not like in red with flashing lights, and it says on the very last page, this bond, in other words the one that's currently being put on the ballot, does not include replacement buildings and facilities that will come due soon. So there's a fourth one coming. Maybe the first one will have rolled off by then. But this is a lot. This is a lot. So I'm going to go back to my friend, who is who works in the district and is a classified worker, which is to say someone who is not teaching certificated. The income's there for the most part, unless you happen to be all the way up at the top of the district as an administrator. Most of the incomes are relatively low, and so we have a bona fide affordability problem. And our question is, what is Kentfield School District doing that's different from other school districts? Why is it so expensive? And is anybody really thinking about the person who's about to get taxed out of his or her house? And we knocked on, we think, based on the number of flyers that disappeared, unless somebody like chucked them on the way because they were tired of knocking on doors, we knocked on between $2,000 and $3,000 and 3,000 doors defeating Measure A, the TAM Union $1 billion tax back in March. And I certainly heard some sorry stories from people who are very concerned about not being able to afford the next tax. It's a drip, 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 and the argument always is, well, but this one's only X amount. Surely you can afford $200 a year because people will spend that going out to to dinner on a Saturday night for one. But not everybody's in that position. So onwards, Larkspur. Yes.
Every time Kentfield or Ross Valley puts a school bond on the proposal on the ballot, it seems there's a lot of commentary that there's so many principals, assistant principals, the administrative structure is so thick.
Yes.
My question is, have they ever thinned that structure Second part of the question is, have they ever responded to those comments in a semi-credible way?
Yes. So, for the most part, the answer is no. I think that a couple of maybe, I know of, maybe one or two districts where they've done some small sharing of, some maintenance, maybe we'll have one maintenance person for one head of maintenance for two buildings or something like that. But no, I mean, pretty much what you have is every school district, 17 school districts, has its own superintendent, fully loaded with pension and benefits that's now running, Kentfield's will be about $330,000 this year. And I think that's pretty typical because they all benchmark against each other. Then you're going to have, that's the superintendent, then however many schools you have, each one has its own principal, assistant principals, etc. Now some of that's natural, you might expect that, but at the district level, you're duplicating things that don't really need to be duplicated. We don't need to reinvent having a business office. We don't need to reinvent having a human resources office. So there definitely could be some duplication that's removed, but I think each little area, the people in, or many of the little areas, particularly maybe the more expensive ones, they really don't want to consolidate with anybody else because they think they have something special. It is an ongoing problem. I think there have been probably at least a couple grand jury reports on that, and here we are. But yes.
Question, why is it that each of these local measures seems to have a different threshold to pass? Is that something that's established by each of the municipalities, or?
No, it has to do with what's allowed by law, but according to the specific kind of tax that they are trying to pass. And so if it's a school bond, it's 55%. And that was lowered at one point from 2/3 because all the seniors were voting no. And one of the things that's not disclosed in the 75 words, which we have tried to make one of the criteria that we're demanding, is that we think they should say there that there are no senior exemptions. We don't care whether you're allowed to have the senior exemptions or not as an issue, school issuing bonds. But we found in knocking on doors with TAM Union that a surprising number of older people didn't actually realize that. They thought, oh, I've signed my tax exemption with the district. I didn't realize if I voted for, and you could see, like, we'd be talking to them and they'd be kind of like, oh, it's for the schools, and then you'd say, but you got to pay for it, and they go, oh. But I mean, in some instances, you could see by the, the level of maintenance of the house or the yard or whatever that they were struggling. So that's the story of Kentfield schools. Larkspur and San Anselmo, they are trying to, there are measures on the ballot that have to do with, in the case, well, in each instance actually, raising the threshold for, lowering the amount of rent that the increase that can go through, and we are opposed to those measures for the reasons that I previously discussed. Okay, so this takes us almost to the end here. TAM Union. So TAM Union is coming forward with a facilities bond. And this is their second try. The first try, of course, was Measure A, going back to March. And we led the campaign against that. It was our first political campaign. And we prevailed in defeating it. And we had a number of criticisms, but I would say the one that got the most traction with voters was the undisclosed $1.04 billion totality of the tax, as well as some of the projects being really aspirational, including one at Tam Union that would have cost over $100 million to replace a cafeteria and some associated neighboring buildings and build a big new complex. None of which, by the way, had been rated priority 1 when they did their facilities master plan, which is a requisite first step of any bond measure. So these were all by their own metrics, with all the consultants that they paid, not a top priority thing, but it was going to be the biggest amount of expenditure that was going to happen. So Tam Union, the bond measure went down. They got together pretty quickly, like immediately, first board meeting after that happened, and started putting their heads together about what are we going to do next. So they looked at some preliminary polling, and the preliminary polling indicated that they wouldn't be able to, they couldn't come back with the same thing again. So the senior administration came before the board and said, well, we have $80 million in critical needs. And they are roofs that are failing, and we have some HVAC issues, like we have places where it's hot outside and the air conditioning isn't working. There may have been some electrical in there or something. Anyhow, it was $80 million of critical needs, and the board was not satisfied with that, and essentially said, well, go back to the drawing. Surely there must be some other critical needs. Well, okay, then they came back with it's kind of the entire enchilada of what their latest thinking had been, which is $279 million bond, all of which has now been rebranded critical needs.
80 to 279.
279. I don't know what.
Big jump.
Yeah. So here we have it. So
I don't like it.
from our point of view, this was actually kind of a difficult one for us. We felt that a 45% cut from where they started was a really pretty significant improvement. It was a victory for us to have achieved them coming back with something that is much more reasonable. They weren't asking for $1 billion anymore, and we, after much deliberation, decided that we would go with a neutral posture, which is to say, you decide. If recognizing there are going to be a lot of taxes on your ballot, and we're suggesting that you be selective and vote for the one that you think is the most important. If this is the most important to you, go for it. So, I don't know, Benedetto, do you have a little comment there?
I do. I am one of the 3 who signed on the ballot against Measure B. I've been following with Mimi Measure A and the Tam High School District for almost 20 years. I had 4 children in Redwood. So basically, they told us that 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, they needed $517 million. Everything was essential. If it didn't pass, everything would end. Now, as Mimi has properly recounted, from 80 they went to 289. And somehow they're saving us money. It's like I want to buy a Jaguar, I don't have the money for the Jag, I buy a Toyota and I save a lot of money because I buy a Toyota. No, that's not the way they work. So I'm surprised sincerely that COST did not oppose it, because I believe that it would not pass if with your help. And we are giving them about $200 million they don't really need. Because we know that it's 80 million, they said it, I was there at the same meeting, they said it, we need 80 millions, and more than 30 millions have been allocated to Archie Williams, and every single project on the 30 millions was not even included in last year's bond, so they literally created $30 million in projects to keep Fairfax, San Anselmo, Sleepy Hollow happy, because that's where they didn't pass. So I know cost is neutral. I thought you should have opposed it because it is against everything of your parameters, not transparent. You know, we know how they act. You don't have any reason to trust them because they've been mismanaging money now for a decade more. And so, yeah, vote no. It's not cost position, but it's really another incredible stealing of money. They spend $10 to $15 million a year on consultants every single year. So they could literally, you can check it out, it's on their budget. So, you know, they can fix a lot of AC every year just not paying the consultant. But anyway, thank you for,
Yes.
you know, defeating Measure A and vote no on Measure B, please.
Would you also make a little comment about the administrative burden there?
Oh, yes. I mean, they are hiring dean of everything at every campus. They just issue, I think in August, I can go on forever about the crazy expenses they're doing. So $450,000 for consultants, $450 an hour. Some of them will be paid. They're not teachers, they're not counselors. They're going to TAM-I somehow to improve the educational value of minorities, but they're not really going to help anybody because they're really doing nothing. We saw their resume. They have a dean of academic success on each campus that I thought that would be the job of everybody right on campus, academic success. That's what they're supposed to do. And all of them are paid extremely well. They keep adding to the top. It's very heavy on the top, and they keep firing or letting go teachers, bigger and bigger classrooms. I saw the change from my oldest kid. He graduated in 2013 to my youngest. She graduated 23. The decline in academics is terrible. So they're doing a terrible job, and they're simply stealing money, and the money is going up to the administrators. And not surprising, last year, about 90% of the donations came from construction companies and consultants. Basically, nobody.
That's who paid for the bond measure.
To support the
campaign.
bond measure.
Yeah.
And in August,
It was like $180,000.
80,000. Already raised more this year, by the way. I checked a few days ago. And in August, they gave a preliminary planning project for the money they're going to spend with Measure B to 2 donors who donated last year. So basically, one of them put in $5,000 and is getting a $1.8 million contract. You know, as I say, that's better than, you know, buying Nvidia 10 years ago. I mean, you don't really make that kind of money on any investment. So that's the way it's going on right there. So I don't trust them at all. But thank you for giving me the opportunity, Mimi,
Thank you,
to say that.
Okay. Let's see, very quickly, because we're kind of running out of time here, and I want to just throw it open to any other questions. San Rafael Library has a parcel tax. Kingston, you just want to give us a couple words about it?
Yeah, it's something we looked at, I mean, I live in Central, I go to the library all the time. We really need a new library. You know, and we need and nice to have a community center, that's all part of it. What upset us was the way they went about doing this. They decided that they were going to have a citizens initiative, which the California courts have now allowed you to do, which is the idea that citizens, you and I, all the ordinary folks, just get together and we go out and we gather enough petitions, but we don't need to have 55% or 2/3. All we need is 50% plus 1 vote.
In other words, you gather a bunch of signatures, you put it on the ballot, and that lowers your threshold to pass it.
Right, and when they went out and they did try and get down to a bunch of citizens to go out and do it, they couldn't get enough signatures. So they went out and hired, raised a whole bunch of money, $100,000, and went out and had to hire a professional signature gathering group. $17 a pop, all right? It's on the ballot. you know, and all of a sudden just showed up, right? It's 50, and they got, all they need is 50%. I mean, God love them, we really need the, you know, the library, but just, we eventually just decided it's important to have the library. We think they're gonna spend the money correctly, the city can't divert it to other things. We checked all those things out. We just don't like the way they did it, so we decided to go neutral. You know? It's
So,
a tough one.
that's how our process works, and sometimes it just lands in the middle.
Is that
Yeah.
how Larkspur did their library? The same
No.
with that?
I don't.
I don't, because they have that sort of thing going.
It's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah. Okay, so, looking forward, I will give myself 2 minutes for this. Looking forward, we have, okay, first of all, there's a fork in the road. It depends what happens if Prop 5 passes. Prop 5 passes, there's gonna be a much bigger list of things that are coming at us fast and furious in 2026, or maybe even before then. There is, I'll start with the smaller things that are gonna happen out there, and then just spend a couple seconds on the bigger one. There is probably coming, or an attempt to put forward a Marin Health bond to replace the last building that hasn't been improved at Marin General. That would be a bond. There is a Ross Valley School District parcel tax, which I think I mentioned to you is likely, because they say they have issues in terms of being able to keep their teachers. I think that would be a per square foot one. There is a smart sales tax renewal that should happen, and they've already gotten the legislature to give them the gift of allowing them to use a special piece of legislation to allow them to use the citizen initiative route, so that they only have 50%, because there's no way they'll get 2/3 approval for renewing the smart tax. And the marine wildfire prevention parcel tax will also be coming our way. So that leaves the two big ones that are out there that are pinning their hopes on Prop 5 passing. One of them is a Bay Area regional tax for 2026 for transportation. And there are a number of agencies, transit agencies in the Bay Area that are deeply underwater post-pandemic, because their ridership has not come back, their revenues haven't come back, and they are not willing or able, I'm not sure which, I haven't looked at it closely enough, to do the downsizing. I think some of them feel if they downsize it will kind of become a downward spiral. And then the big one that we have our eye on is the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority bond, also known as the BAFA bond, or Regional Measure 4. And Regional Measure 4 was supposed to be on our ballots this fall, and it was going to be kind of the local kingpin of tax tsunami, and it was proposed as a $20 billion affordable housing bond that was completely unaffordable. It was to be 53 years, levying $190 supposedly per $1 million assessed value. Though the graph was really funny, because it starts out and then it gets all the way up to $340. And then somebody did the math and figured out that they had the number that they put in the 75 words was off by a fairly sizable margin, at which point it was removed from the ballot. But they will be back. And I could go into that, but there's all kinds of finance, to me, fascinating detail, but instead I will answer questions if anybody has any. Yes?
Just I have several pretty quick questions you can answer
Sure.
probably pretty quickly. First of all, are you a national organization or associated with any national organizations? Because this is really excellent. It's the first time I've ever attended. I loved what I just heard.
Well, thank you for saying that. No, we're a unicorn. But we wish that we could figure out a way to get more interest in other organizations popping up to be kind of centrist, but it doesn't have to be politically centrist, but it's, it's civically and fiscally centrist. One idea that I've had recently is, our year, we go odd years and even years. The even years are all the big elections and nothing else gets done in the even years except election stuff. But odd years are a time for reflection. And it might be interesting to see, for example, if we could reach out to a political science department or a graduate school of government studies or something like that, to see if somebody's interested in writing a paper about what we do, and maybe that would get some traction in other places, because we would love to be able to, to have something that's lasting not only here, but somewhere else.
Well, it's great. Listen, I want to ask these quick, because I know other people
Sorry.
have questions.
Yeah.
No problem. How do you have so much clout if you're just a little organization, and you actually change?
I'm gonna let Kingston answer. You're gonna make me answer it?
I have one more question.
Okay.
Yes, I am. I'm not gonna do that.
Okay, so I think the simple answer, and it's hard to be modest about what we've done, success.
Good for you. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And then my last question. How often is bond money or tax money that we're told is going to be used for one thing, and it ends up being used for something else?
I don't know how common that is. I haven't done a study on that. But what I can say is that the language of all the bond measures are intentionally written so expansively and at the same time so loosely as to be essentially carte blanche. And that's the fundamental problem that was identified by Mill Valley. And the weird thing about Mill Valley is that it was something that, as far as they could tell, and they had some pretty smart lawyers looking at it, wasn't really in that expansive language. But that's unusual. So no, it's a problem. That's what the core thing that is wrong with bonds. And it's not to say we can live without them, but it's a big problem.
Thank you.
A question from a bond ignorant geologist. It's quite worrisome when you mention Novato fiscal mismanagement, and they
Yes.
haven't had an audit for, 3 years, you said?
I didn't quite say that. What I said was they, at one point, were 3 years behind. Now they're only 1 year behind. In other words, they're late in reporting by only 12 months or so.
Okay. My question is, when new money is raised by a school district or a city,
Yes.
is that new money ring-fenced so it can't be intermixed with other monies in the treasury, and thereby in part used to pay interest on the bonds, and thereby creating a Ponzi scheme?
Right, okay. So usually it goes the other way. Yes, there are laws that say what you can spend it on depending on what exactly it was that you put in your resolution and the kind of tax that it is under the state statutes. But you will always see this kind of misleading language on a ballot that says something like, for example, a school parcel tax. It'll say, this money will go for teachers and classroom supplies and this and that, and not a penny will go to administrators or to pensions. Well, maybe. I mean, it goes into the general fund, and more importantly, the money's fungible. So, okay, the money that you already were getting from our regular property taxes, just a larger proportion of that, goes over to those other things that the ballot measure says it's not going to spend on, and so, yeah.
My question, I live in Nevada,
Yes.
so I know I'm not going to change your position or
Yes.
anyone else's, but I wanted to say, you said it's like a gun to the head.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. What I find is in Nevada and maybe other places, everybody wants the services. Our roads in Nevada are terrible.
Yes.
There's a lot that really needs to be done there. We used to have over 220 staff in the city. Now we have 180. That's a lot. And I know whenever you try to get something done by the city, oh, we're understaffed, we can't do that. They are understaffed. They can't do that. So even though the gun's to our head, if this doesn't pass, it's going to be even worse.
So,
So what would you, I mean,
yeah.
so what do you do?
So our answer to that, and Bernie Myers is here in the room, I don't know if he has a comment to make, but I'll just precede it with one quick answer to that. Former mayor of Nevada. The gun to the head was of their choosing, because it was clear that they were going to get opposition if they made it a forever tax. They could have said, well, go for 10 years, and I don't think there would have been a success. If anybody had opposed it, probably wouldn't have been successful because of the reasons that you're talking about. And I personally can't understand why they made that decision.
Did they go to you?
No.
Ah.
But we were in the room when they voted on that, and it was pretty clear where we stood. Bernie, do you have something more to say?
Do we have a half hour to answer?
No, we have 3 minutes.
I have flyers for anybody from Novato as to why you should vote no. Your question, of course, is a good one. It's slightly off in that they have 195, and it was quite some time ago that they had 200 and some. I was on the council in those days. Not 1890, but 1990. There are several things. One is, I think you should vote no, and they can be back on the ballot as soon as March 4 of next year with a much better sales tax measure that has a sunset clause, that has a really independent committee to look and see what they're doing, and requires them to set what it is that they're going to do with the money, which they're not doing now. Someone asked about moving the money around, and the answer is yes, they can. In this case, because it says potholes, police, etc., but then it says for general use. So throw all that other stuff out and stick with the general use. One of the things they can do with that is to pay the unfunded pensions. In my view, is they should, because it's an obligation of the city. But they don't put that in there, so that people that are voting on the tax don't understand that that's one of the things they're going to pay. Some people don't like that, and I understand why they slanted the ballot measure that way. I can answer other questions, and I would like to, as you walk out, if you're a Novato citizen, I can give you this flyer, and I'd be pleased to talk to any of you about it. Thank you.
Okay, we're almost at it. I'm going to give one more question, and then just a couple closing comments.
Hey, I'm Stephen Keys from Fairfax. For those who, I suspect everybody knows Mimi, but for those who don't, Mimi is a national treasure, and we've got her here in Marin. Now, I know she's really...
You might have to take a county vote on that. You might lose that one.
And she's been able to assemble quite a good team, of which Kingston is part, to help do this. I was on the NWPA negotiating team to get created, and Mimi was spectacular in getting them to write that new idea of a sunset clause. It really was superb.
Thank you, Steve.
So I think it's 5:30. We're going to have to end the discussion now. Well, first of all, I want to thank Mimi and her team for coming today. You know, the Marin Coalition's motto or theme is conversations that matter.
Get behind the podium.
What?
So you're in the camera.
Okay.
And I want to say one more thing too before you sign off.
So again, I want to thank Mimi and her team for being here today. The Marin Coalition's motto is conversations that matter, and I think today is a perfect example of what our group does and can do at future presentations. I think this is a very positive, informative, educational session, so I want to thank all of you for coming. I also want to remind you that our next session is November 20th, in which we'll have the former foreperson of the Marin County Grand Jury who will talk about the grand jury. So Mimi has her closing.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Marin Coalition for sponsoring this with our contributions. And I want to point out that you have on your table the yellow sheets where if you aren't already on our contact list, I strongly encourage it. People like what we send them, and they tell us we don't send enough, which probably never happens when you poll people who are on your e-blast list. 60% now of every e-blast that goes out gets opened, and our surveys show that people want more. So I think you will find it engaging.
Do you share these lists?
No, we don't. We also do not. Everybody's name is confidential, as are donations to us, and there is a donate button. But I also recognize that this is our Friends at Marin Coalition's forum, so give to them first, and then if you still have some money left, we could definitely put it to good use. So.
Also on your table is our questionnaire, so we'd appreciate you'd spend a minute or two completing that. That helps us.
And I know too, at least a couple people had their hands up at the end, and we had a kind of hardish cutoff at 5:30, so I'll be here for a few minutes if you want to talk some more.
Can I ask a question about cost?
Yes.
I donated today to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
But I had a question.
Yes.
The difference between the regular cost and the foundation.
Correct.
The
Okay.
foundation you can donate and take a tax deduction.
Correct. So we have two entities at the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayer. Original cost, which is a 501c4. And we didn't really know what we were going to grow up to be, and so we wanted to make sure we were really squeaky clean from the beginning, that anything we did was allowed under what we told the IRS that we might plausibly do. And so that included, education and watchdog work and that kind of thing. We send out an annual communication through the whole county, as many people as we can figure out that we can afford to get to. We're still working on getting more higher up in terms of what we can spend on this. Telling people about the taxes and fee discounts that they can get, that they may qualify for, that they never realized because the thresholds are so high, or they never knew about. And when those deadlines are, we send it out every year. And then there are things that you can only do to a very limited extent out of a C4, let me try again. Let me back up. Okay, they can do all those things, plus we can do advocacy, and we can, run political campaigns, things like that, out of a C4. We can do a full gamut of things that we would want to do. We were challenged after our first year of operations by someone who wanted to give us some money with a tax deduction. He said, I will pay for all of what it costs you to do that, plus, I don't know what it was, I think $3,000 or something like that, if you will go and found a 501c3, which we did. And donations to the C3 are deductible. However, they cannot do those latter two things that I talked about, which through a lot of our history, they weren't that substantial, but this year, we're running, we had a spring campaign that was very expensive. We're trying to do a fall campaign that we're struggling with, but we think we're getting it out the door. So those are expensive, and that requires C4 money. So we're happy to have it all, but right now, honestly, we would much prefer if you gave us a slightly smaller donation to the C4 rather than the C3, because we have a use for it.
Okay, if you have any other questions, please, maybe Mimi will be available to answer them right here.
Thank you. Thanks.